My name is Abigail Crawford, 32 years old, and until 4:30 p.m. today, I was the senior risk officer at Meridian Financial. 7 years of dedication, hundreds of warnings documented, all ignored. When Director James Harrington called me to that Friday meeting, I already knew. "Consider your files purged," he announced coldly. "No loose ends." He underestimated one thing: I still had access until 5 p.m. At 5:01, I sent one PDF to the board: Q3 risk register, all ignored warnings. Before I tell you how the chairman's smile evaporated when he opened that file, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever stood up for what's right in the workplace. My journey to Meridian Financial began right after I completed my master's in financial risk management from Cornell. I had big dreams, and even bigger student loans. When Meridian offered me an entry-level risk analyst position, I jumped at the opportunity. The company had a sterling reputation in the financial industry, known for its conservative approach and rock-solid risk management practices. It was exactly the kind of place where I wanted to build my career. I started as just another analyst in a sea of cubicles, spending my days running models and preparing reports that would travel up the chain of command. I was meticulous, detail-oriented, and had an uncanny ability to spot potential issues before they materialized. These qualities didn't go unnoticed. By my third year, I had been promoted twice, and was now a senior risk officer reporting directly to Thomas Grant, the chief risk officer. Thomas was old school, cautious by nature, and he valued my thoroughness. "Abigail," he would say in this business, "the person who sees the storm coming before anyone else is worth their weight in gold." I believed him. I trusted him. In those early days, the executive team seemed to genuinely value risk management. Elizabeth Parker, our CFO, would often stop by our department to discuss upcoming financial strategies, actively seeking our input before major decisions were made. She was brilliant, with sharp eyes that seemed to calculate everything, even in casual conversation. I admired her and saw her as a potential mentor. Nathan Wells, the COO, was different. Tall and imposing with a perpetual frown, he had come from an investment banking background where risk was something to be managed after decisions were made, not before. Still, in those first years, even he would grudgingly listen to our assessments. My closest ally in the department was Sophia Bennett, another risk analyst who had joined 6 months after me. We bonded over late nights preparing quarterly reports and shared a commitment to protecting the company from unnecessary exposure. Sophia was more politically savvy than me, always aware of the currents of power flowing through the organization. "You need to learn to package bad news better," she advised me once, after a particularly tense meeting. "It's not just about being right, it's about making them feel like the solution was their idea all along." I should have paid more attention to her advice. Everything changed when William Davis became chairman of the board. Tall, silver-haired, with an aristocratic bearing and a Harvard MBA, Davis made it clear from his first shareholder meeting that Meridian needed to be more aggressive and less risk-averse to compete in today's market. The cultural shift was subtle at first. Questions about risk assessments that once received thoughtful consideration were now met with impatient sighs. Meetings that used to include the risk team from the beginning were now conducted without us, our input sought only after decisions had effectively been made. Then came the Wellington Fund proposal. It was a major new investment strategy that promised exceptional returns by leveraging emerging market debt in ways that to me looked terrifyingly similar to practices that had led to the financial crisis years earlier. When the proposal landed on my desk for risk assessment, I spent 3 straight days analyzing it, barely sleeping, running scenario after scenario. My conclusion was unambiguous. The Wellington strategy exposed Meridian to catastrophic risk if certain market conditions occurred. I prepared a comprehensive report, complete with historical precedents and statistical models showing the potential downsides. When I presented my findings to the executive committee, there was an uncomfortable silence. Thomas shifted in his seat, not quite meeting my eyes. Elizabeth studied her notes intently. Nathan was the first to speak. "While we appreciate the thoroughness of your analysis, Abigail," he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I think you're being excessively cautious here. The market conditions you're describing are highly unlikely." "But not impossible," I countered. "And if they do occur, we could be looking at losses that would threaten the company's very existence." Nathan's smile disappeared. "Part of taking calculated risks is actually taking them. We can't grow if we're paralyzed by every remote possibility." I looked to Thomas for support, but he only offered a non-committal. "We'll take your concerns under advisement." That was the first time my warnings were politely acknowledged and then effectively ignored. It wouldn't be the last. As weeks passed, I watched with growing alarm as the Wellington strategy was implemented with only cosmetic modifications to my concerns. Sophia noticed my increasing frustration. "Be careful, Abigail," she warned one evening as we shared a rare after-work drink. "I'm hearing things. Nathan thinks you're becoming an obstacle to growth." "An obstacle to reckless endangerment, maybe," I replied. "Just be a team player when you can. Pick your battles." But that was the problem. To me, these weren't battles. They were fundamental responsibilities. I hadn't gone into risk management to rubber-stamp dangerous decisions. I'd chosen this career to protect companies from themselves when necessary. A week later, Nathan cornered me after a meeting. His voice was low, but his message was clear. "You need to decide if you're a team player, Abigail. No one advances here by being the person who always says no." Even Elizabeth, who had once been supportive, began keeping her distance. When I tried to schedule our usual quarterly lunch, her assistant informed me that she was indefinitely busy with the new strategic initiatives. The message was becoming clear. My commitment to sound risk management was becoming a career liability at the new Meridian Financial. 6 months after the Wellington Fund launch, I discovered something troubling while reviewing documentation for our newest financial product, the Accelerator Portfolio. The marketing materials promised guaranteed minimum returns, while the actual product terms included no such guarantees. This wasn't just a risk issue, it was a compliance problem that could trigger regulatory action. I spent the weekend compiling a detailed analysis, comparing the marketing language with the actual product specifications, relevant regulations, and precedents where other financial institutions had faced penalties for similar discrepancies. I was thorough, objective, and careful to frame everything in terms of protecting the company. On Monday morning, I requested an urgent meeting with the product team, Thomas, and the legal department. My presentation was scheduled for that afternoon. The conference room was tense as I walked through my findings. Patricia Alvarez, our head of legal, looked increasingly concerned as I spoke. Thomas kept glancing at his phone. The product team, led by Michael Turner, grew visibly defensive. "These are serious compliance issues," I concluded. "If we don't address them before the full product launch next month, we could face significant regulatory penalties, not to mention reputation damage." Michael responded immediately, his voice sharp. "This is a complete overreaction. The marketing language uses standard industry phrasing. Everyone knows what guaranteed minimum returns means in context." "Regulators might disagree," Patricia interjected cautiously. "Abigail does raise some valid concerns." That's when the door opened and Nathan walked in, followed by a man I hadn't met before. "Sorry to interrupt," Nathan said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "I heard there were concerns about the Accelerator portfolio and thought we should address them immediately." He gestured to the man beside him. "This is James Harrington, our new Director of Strategy. He'll be overseeing product launches going forward." James Harrington was everything I wasn't, smooth polished with the practiced charm of someone who had spent a career telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, and his eyes calculating as they briefly assessed me. "I've reviewed the Accelerator documentation," James said, taking a seat at the head of the table, a position that should have been Thomas's. "While I appreciate Miss Crawford's attention to detail, I think there's been a misinterpretation of both the marketing intent and the regulatory standards." I watched in disbelief as he proceeded to dismantle my concerns point by point, not with substantive arguments but with corporate doublespeak and references to his extensive experience with similar launches at Goldman Sachs. The product team visibly relaxed. Even Patricia seemed swayed. When I tried to respond with specific regulatory citations, James cut me off smoothly. "I think we've spent enough time on this. The Accelerator portfolio launch remains on schedule. Miss Crawford, perhaps you could focus your valuable skills on the risk assessment for our Q3 initiatives instead." The meeting was effectively over. As people filed out, I noticed Thomas hadn't said a single word in my defense. When I approached him afterward, his response was terse. "James has the board's confidence on this. Let it go, Abigail." But I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I noticed James's influence growing. He was in constant meetings with Nathan and Elizabeth. He lunched regularly with board members. And most concerning, he seemed to be systematically sidelining the risk management department from key decisions. Then I found the discrepancies in the financial reporting. It started with small inconsistencies between internal performance metrics and what was being prepared for the board. The differences weren't large enough to trigger automatic alarms, but followed a pattern that artificially inflated the performance of recent initiatives, particularly the Wellington Fund. I spent nights cross-referencing reports tracking money flows and documenting the discrepancies. What I found wasn't definitive proof of fraud, but it certainly suggested intentional misrepresentation. This was beyond my usual risk concerns. This could be criminal. I requested a private meeting with Thomas, determined to keep this discovery contained until I understood what was happening. When we met in his office, I carefully laid out what I'd found. These patterns suggest the Wellington returns are being artificially boosted, possibly by shifting losses to older established portfolios, where they're less likely to draw attention. I explained, sliding my documentation across his desk. Thomas didn't even look at it. His face was ashen, and for the first time since I'd known him, he seemed afraid. "You need to stop this investigation immediately," he said quietly. "But if what I'm seeing is accurate—" "Abigail." His voice was firm now. "This is a direct order. Drop it. The Wellington strategy is a board priority, and James has personally assured them of its performance. So we're just going to falsify returns. What happens when reality catches up?" Thomas stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. "That's enough. Return to your assigned projects. This matter is closed." As I left his office, I realized that Thomas, my mentor and champion for years, had chosen his career over his integrity. The realization hurt more than I expected. The next day, my security badge no longer gave me access to the executive floor. My system permissions for financial reporting were quietly downgraded. Messages to Elizabeth went unanswered. I was being isolated. Sophia caught me in the break room, her voice a concerned whisper. "What did you do, James?" "Was in a closed-door meeting with Nathan and HR yesterday, and your name kept coming up. I found problems with the Wellington numbers," I admitted. She closed her eyes briefly. "There are rumors about a restructuring. Risk management is supposedly being realigned under strategy." "Under James, you mean?" "Just be prepared. Okay. Update your resume. Don't leave anything important on company servers." That night I did something I'd never done before. I copied key documents, emails, and my entire risk register to a personal drive. Not because I planned to use them, but because I was starting to fear they might disappear. As the weeks passed, my isolation grew complete. I was excluded from meetings that had once been mandatory for my role. Projects were reassigned without explanation. Thomas avoided me entirely. The impact spread to my personal life. I stopped sleeping well. Friends complained that I was distracted and distant. I canceled plans repeatedly because I was either working late trying to piece together what was happening or simply too exhausted to socialize. Through it all, I maintained my risk register. It had started as a standard professional practice, documenting identified risks, mitigation recommendations, and management responses. But it had evolved into something more comprehensive, a complete record of every warning ignored, every dangerous decision made, every potential consequence predicted. It included emails, meeting notes, financial projections, and the signatures of those who had dismissed my concerns. I didn't know then how important that register would become. I just knew that maintaining it felt like the only part of my job I could still do with integrity. The email arrived at 10:30 on a Friday morning requesting my presence at a 4:30 p.m. meeting in the main conference room. No agenda, no explanation, just a mandatory attendance notice from James Harrington's assistant. I knew immediately what it meant. I spent the day backing up my files, clearing personal items from my desk in small batches so as not to draw attention and saying subtle goodbyes to the few colleagues I still trusted. Sophia was out of the office at a conference, which was probably intentional timing. At 4:25, I walked to the conference room with my head high, my resignation letter already drafted but unsent in my personal email. I wanted them to do it to own their decision. The conference room had an atmosphere of artificial formality. James sat at the head of the table, flanked by Allison Rivers from HR and a security officer I didn't recognize. No sign of Thomas, Elizabeth, or Nathan. They had delegated the unpleasant task. "Abigail, thank you for joining us." James began with corporate politeness that felt like an insult under the circumstances. As you know, Meridian has been undergoing strategic realignment to better position ourselves in the market. I remained silent, letting him work through his scripted speech about organizational efficiency and streamlined reporting structures. After careful consideration, he finally arrived at the point: we've determined that your position is being eliminated effective immediately. Allison slid a folder across the table. This contains information about your severance package, continuation of benefits, and the non-disclosure agreement you'll need to sign to receive severance. I left the folder untouched. Is Thomas aware of this decision? James's smile tightened slightly. This decision has been approved at all appropriate levels. I see. And the risk management function? Who will be overseeing that? Risk assessment will be integrated into each business unit with strategic oversight from my office. It's a more efficient model that eliminates redundancy. Translation: risk management would be performed by the very people taking the risks, reporting to the man whose job was to push those risks through. It was like putting arsonists in charge of fire safety. I'll need time to review these documents with my attorney, I said, finally taking the folder. James's smile disappeared completely. The severance offer is contingent on immediate acceptance and full confidentiality. If you choose not to sign today, you'll forfeit the package. It was a power play designed to pressure me into signing away my rights while still reeling from the news. I had expected this too. Then I'll be forfeiting it, I replied calmly. I never sign legal documents without proper review. Something flashed in James's eyes. Anger, concern. It was gone too quickly to identify. That's your choice. In that case, George will escort you to collect your personal belongings and then to the exit. Your access has already been deactivated and company property, including your laptop and phone, will remain here. The security officer, George, apparently stood. His expression was professionally neutral, but there was sympathy in his eyes. This wasn't his first Friday afternoon escort. As I stood to leave, James added what he clearly thought was the final nail. Consider your files purged, Abigail. No loose ends. Meridian appreciates your past service and wishes you well in your future endeavors. The humiliation of being escorted through the office was exactly as awful as I had anticipated. Colleagues glanced up, then quickly away, pretending to be absorbed in their screens. A few looked genuinely shocked or sympathetic, but no one spoke. Fear is a powerful silencer in corporate America. At my desk, George stood respectfully aside as I collected my plants photos and the few personal items I hadn't already removed. My computer was locked, a notice indicating that my access had been revoked. I'm sorry about this, George said quietly as we waited for the elevator. For what it's worth, it doesn't seem right. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The emotional impact was hitting me now, a mixture of rage, grief, and vertigo. 7 years of my career gone, my professional reputation potentially in tatters. All because I'd done my job too well, too ethically. As we reached the lobby, George handed me a visitor badge to replace my employee one. Building policy, he explained apologetically. You'll need to sign out at security. At the security desk, as I signed the visitor log, I noticed the time, 4:58 p.m. A detail tickled at the back of my mind, something from IT security training. Standard protocol was to deactivate all access simultaneously, with termination, but I thanked George, walked out into the late afternoon sunshine, and sat on a public bench just outside the building. Opening my personal phone, I navigated to the Meridian webmail portal and held my breath as I entered my credentials. I was in. My heart raced as I realized what had happened. HR had terminated my building and network access, but in the rush of a Friday afternoon, they had forgotten to immediately deactivate my email. It was a small oversight that would likely be corrected within hours, if not minutes. But it might be enough. I thought of James's smug confidence. Consider your files purged. He thought he had won, had silenced me, and erased my warnings. He didn't know about my home backups, my meticulous documentation of everything that had happened. In that moment, sitting on a bench outside the building that had been my professional home for 7 years, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about my job anymore. It was about right and wrong, about the investors who would be harmed, the employees whose careers and retirement funds were at risk, the potential economic damage if Meridian collapsed under the weight of its hidden risks. I had one chance to do the right thing, and I had to decide now. The rational part of me argued for caution. Walk away. Hire a lawyer. File a wrongful termination suit. Let the system work. But another voice, stronger and clearer, reminded me of how well the system had been working so far. By the time any lawsuit made its way through the courts, irreparable damage could be done. The risk register contained warnings of potential catastrophes that could materialize any day. I opened my email and began composing a new message. The recipients were the full board of directors, including Chairman William Davis. The subject line was simple: Q3, Risk Register, all ignored warnings. My hands shook slightly as I attached the comprehensive document I had fortuitously backed up. It contained everything: the Wellington Fund irregularities, the accelerator portfolio compliance issues, emails showing my warnings and their dismissals, financial projections indicating the potential losses, meeting recordings where concerns were ridiculed. All of it meticulously organized, professionally presented, and undeniably damning. In the body of the email, I wrote simply, "Board members, attached, please find the complete risk register detailing all warnings provided to management over the past 18 months, the responses received, and the potential consequences to Meridian Financial. I provide this to you directly in fulfillment of my fiduciary duty, as normal reporting channels have been compromised. Respectfully, Abigail Crawford, former Senior Risk Officer." My finger hovered over the send button as I checked the time again, 5:01 p.m., exactly 1 minute after my termination was official. 1 minute into my life as a whistleblower. I pressed send. Then I turned off my phone, put it in my bag, and walked to the subway, imagining the chaos that would erupt when William Davis opened that attachment. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I went to a small cafe several blocks from my apartment, one with no Wi-Fi, and where no one from Meridian would think to look for me. I ordered a strong black coffee and tried to steady my nerves as I thought about what I had just done. The document I had sent wasn't hastily compiled in anger. It was the culmination of months of methodical documentation, organized with the same precision I brought to all my work. I had been preparing it not as an act of revenge, but as a professional duty, a final resort, if all other risk management channels failed, which they had. The main body of the document was divided chronologically, starting with the earliest warnings about the Wellington Fund. Each section included the original risk assessment with data and projections, emails showing management's dismissal of concerns, meeting notes documenting verbal responses, signatures of executives who had approved moving forward despite warnings, financial projections showing potential consequences. I had been particularly careful with the accelerator portfolio section, highlighting the explicit regulatory violations and including screenshots of the marketing materials alongside the actual product terms. I had even cited the specific regulations being violated and included cases where other financial institutions had faced penalties for similar actions. The section on financial reporting irregularities was the most damning. I had included side-by-side comparisons of internal performance metrics and board reports highlighting discrepancies and tracing how losses were being shifted between portfolios to artificially inflate the performance of James's pet projects. I had added recordings of key meetings, all legally obtained in a one-party consent state, where Meridian's own policies stated that all business discussions might be recorded for quality assurance purposes. These included James dismissing compliance concerns and Nathan instructing the accounting team to present the numbers in the most favorable light. For the board's convenience, I had written an executive summary at the beginning, outlining the most serious issues and their potential consequences in clear, non-technical language. I had been professionally detached, letting the evidence speak for itself, rather than including any personal grievances about my termination. As I sat in the cafe, I imagined the scene unfolding at Meridian. William Davis would likely be in his home office for the regular Friday afternoon update call with key executives. He would see the email arrive, might even open it during the call, expecting it to be a routine risk report. The first page would immediately make it clear this was anything but routine. He would see the executive summary outlining potential regulatory violations, fraudulent reporting, and catastrophic risk exposure. His expression would change from confusion to shock to anger. I could almost see him muting his line on the call, turning to his assistant with that slight shake in his voice. "Get legal on the line, and find out where she is." By now, James would be getting frantic calls. Nathan and Elizabeth would be scrambling to contain the damage. Thomas might finally be realizing the magnitude of what his silence had enabled. My phone, still turned off in my bag, undoubtedly had dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts from Meridian's legal team, from executives, perhaps even from board members themselves. Part of me felt sick with anxiety. I had just torpedoed my career in financial services. No matter how justified my actions, I would forever be labeled a whistleblower, a troublemaker, someone who couldn't be trusted to keep company secrets. Even if I was right about everything, many doors would now be permanently closed to me. Another part of me felt an overwhelming sense of relief. After months of being silenced, dismissed, and marginalized for doing my job, I had finally been heard. The truth was out, for better or worse. As I finished my coffee, I considered my next moves carefully. I would need legal representation immediately. I would need to secure my home and electronic devices. I would need to prepare for the storm that was coming. But for this brief moment, sitting in a quiet cafe, while corporate chaos erupted across town, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months' peace. I had done my duty as a risk officer. I had protected the company from those who would sacrifice its future for short-term gains and bonuses. Whatever came next, I could face it knowing I had acted with integrity. I paid for my coffee, left a generous tip, and stepped back into the fading daylight. It was time to go home and prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging chapter of my professional life. The calls started at 5:15 p.m., according to my phone's log, when I finally turned it back on in my apartment. The first was from Allison in HR, probably realizing I still had email access. Then Thomas. Then Meridian's general counsel. By 6 p.m., even Elizabeth had called, leaving a terse message, asking me to please call back immediately regarding an urgent matter. None of them mentioned the document specifically, careful not to create evidence of having received it, but the timing told me everything I needed to know. They had seen it, and they were panicking. At 7:30, my doorbell rang. It was a courier with a hand-delivered letter from Meridian's legal department, demanding the return of all company property and documents in my possession, and threatening legal action for theft of confidential information and violation of various company policies. I placed the letter in a folder marked evidence and called Catherine Morgan, a lawyer friend who specialized in employment law and whistleblower cases. We arranged to meet first thing in the morning. As I tried to sleep that night, I imagined the emergency meetings taking place, the frantic calls between executives and board members, the desperate attempts to construct a narrative that would minimize the damage. I wondered if William Davis was reading through the complete document, now finally seeing the full picture of what had been happening under his watch. And I wondered what tomorrow would bring. By 8 a.m. Saturday, my phone showed 17 missed calls, including 3 from unknown numbers that were likely board members. I didn't return any of them, following Catherine's advice to have no communication with Meridian except through her. Catherine arrived at my apartment at 9, professional and focused, despite the weekend interruption. As I made coffee, she reviewed the termination documents and the threatening letter from legal. "They've overplayed their hand with these threats," she observed, setting the letter aside. "Now tell me everything, starting from the beginning." For the next 2 hours, I walked her through the entire situation, the cultural shift at Meridian, the ignored warnings, the irregularities I had discovered, and finally my termination and the document I had sent to the board. "Do you have copies of everything you sent them?" she asked. I nodded and handed her a flash drive, plus backups in multiple locations. She smiled approvingly. "Smart. Now let's talk about your legal position. Based on what you've told me, you're covered under federal whistleblower protections, specifically SOX Section 806 and Dodd-Frank. You reported potential securities violations and fraud to those with the authority to address it after attempting to use internal channels. What about the NDA I signed when I joined Meridian?" "NDAs cannot legally prevent the disclosure of illegal activities. They'll threaten, but if what you've documented is accurate, they're in a very weak position legally." My phone buzzed with another call from Meridian's legal department. Catherine glanced at it. "Let it go to voicemail. From now on, I'll handle all communication." She continued outlining my legal position, explaining whistleblower protections and potential countermeasures Meridian might attempt. She was in the middle of explaining anti-retaliation provisions when my laptop chimed with a news alert. The headline made my stomach drop: "Meridian Financial stocks fall in after hours, trading amid rumors of internal turmoil." Catherine read it over my shoulder. That was fast. Someone leaked something. I didn't talk to any journalists, I said quickly. I know. But board members talk to each other. Executives call trusted allies for advice. Word gets around, especially when it's this. Explosive. She tapped the screen thoughtfully. This actually works in our favor. Public scrutiny makes it harder for them to sweep things under the rug. By noon, Sophia had called 3 times. I finally texted her back. I'm okay. Can't talk now. Be careful. Her response was immediate OMG. Emergency board meeting called. James is freaking out. What did you do? I didn't reply. Catherine was making calls to colleagues who specialized in securities law and financial whistleblowing cases, building a team for what might become a complex legal battle. At 2 p.m., an email arrived from Elizabeth breaking the silence about the document directly. Abigail, the board is reviewing your concerns with the seriousness they deserve. I've always respected your diligence. Would you be willing to meet privately to discuss a resolution that addresses your concerns while minimizing disruption to the company? This could be beneficial for all parties. Elizabeth Parker, CFO. Catherine read it and shook her head. Classic. They're trying to compartmentalize and contain. Minimizing disruption means keeping this quiet with an NDA and settlement. She drafted a response, formal and non-committal, directing all communication to her as my legal representative. By late afternoon, news of Meridian's stock decline had made it to larger financial news outlets. Analysts were speculating about the cause, with theories ranging from failed deals to regulatory investigations. The truth hadn't leaked yet, but the pressure was building. You should know, Catherine said as she prepared to leave. They're going to paint you as disgruntled, incompetent, or mentally unstable. It's standard character assassination for whistleblowers. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it. Yes. My work speaks for itself, and the evidence doesn't lie. Good, because this is going to get worse before it gets better. She was right. Sunday morning brought a formal legal threat from Meridian sent to Catherine. They accused me of theft of confidential information, violation of fiduciary duty, and breach of contract. They demanded the return of all documents and a signed agreement never to disclose any information about Meridian. Catherine's response was brief and devastating. Miss Crawford's actions are protected under federal whistleblower statutes. Any retaliation will result in additional claims against Meridian Financial and personal liability for executives involved. We have secured all evidence with multiple third parties. We look forward to regulatory review of the issues identified. By Sunday evening, Sophia texted again, board in emergency session all day. Thomas and James placed on administrative leave pending investigation. What the hell is in that document? Monday brought the storm in full force. The Wall Street Journal ran a story: Meridian Financial faces internal investigation after risk officer's allegations. They didn't have the details yet, but they knew a whistleblower was involved. Meridian's stock dropped 12% at opening. Trading was temporarily halted mid-morning. Catherine called with news. The SEC has entered the chat. They've contacted me about interviewing you regarding the allegations. This just got very real. Nathan attempted damage control with a hastily arranged press conference, claiming I had been terminated for performance issues and had retaliated with false allegations. He painted me as emotionally unstable and said my claims were without merit and currently under legal review. The character assassination Catherine had predicted was happening in real time. But Nathan's performance was undermined when a reporter asked directly about the Wellington Fund irregularities and the accelerator portfolio compliance issues. The specific nature of the question suggested someone else from inside Meridian was now talking. Nathan's visible discomfort spoke volumes. By Monday afternoon, 3 different law firms had announced investigations into potential securities fraud at Meridian, the first step toward class action lawsuits on behalf of shareholders. Through it all, I remained at home, speaking only to Catherine and her growing legal team. I avoided social media and news coverage as much as possible, focusing instead on preparing for my interview with SEC investigators scheduled for Wednesday. Tuesday morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Abigail, it's William Davis. I nearly hung up, but curiosity kept me on the line. Mr. Davis, I'm represented by counsel. All communication should go through. I know, he interrupted. This call isn't happening. But I needed to ask you one thing directly. He paused. Did you know how bad it was? All of it. The question surprised me. Yes, sir. That's why I documented everything. That's why I tried to stop it through proper channels for months. There was a long silence. Then, the board has received an offer. They want to bring you back. New position. Chief Risk Officer with direct board reporting line. Substantial compensation package. Full authority. Now it was my turn to be silent. The offer was tempting, professionally vindicating, and undoubtedly lucrative. But what about the Wellington Fund issues, the accelerator portfolio, the financial reporting irregularities? Being addressed. James and Nathan are out effective immediately. Thomas has resigned. Elizabeth is cooperating fully with our internal investigation. And the legal threats against me. Withdrawn completely, of course. I considered the offer. Return triumphant. Take Thomas's position. Work directly with the board. It was everything I should have wanted. I'll discuss it with my attorney, I finally said. Do that. But Abigail, we need someone with your integrity. Especially now. After he hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand, thinking about the offer and what it really meant. They wanted to bring me inside, contain the damage, use my credibility to rebuild trust. It made perfect business sense. But something felt wrong. The same board that had enabled James and Nathan, that had prioritized aggressive growth over sound risk management, now wanted me to help them save face. They weren't offering because they valued integrity. They were offering because they had been caught. When Catherine called later that day, I told her about Davis's offer. It's substantial, she acknowledged, and it would certainly be easier than the path we're on. But I have to ask, do you trust them to have really changed overnight? I didn't, and that was the problem. There's another option, Catherine continued. The SEC whistleblower program. If your information leads to successful enforcement actions, you could be entitled to 10 to 30% of monetary sanctions. Given what you've uncovered, that could be significant. It's not about the money, I said. I know, but it's about accountability. Sometimes the only way to create real change is through external pressure. That night I declined William Davis's offer. The SEC investigation moved with surprising speed, perhaps due to the high-profile nature of the case and the comprehensive documentation I had provided. Within 2 weeks, they had interviewed dozens of Meridian employees and secured thousands of internal documents. What they found confirmed everything in my risk register and uncovered even more issues I hadn't been aware of. The Wellington Fund irregularities were worse than I had realized, with losses approaching $500 million hidden through creative accounting across multiple quarters. The accelerator portfolio had been launched despite explicit warnings from the legal department as well as my own, with James overriding concerns and instructing the marketing team to proceed with the misleading materials. Most damaging of all, investigators discovered communications between James and Nathan discussing how to manage the narrative around risk assessments and handle problem employees who raised too many concerns. My name featured prominently in those exchanges. Meridian's stock continued its decline as more details emerged. Class action lawsuits multiplied. Institutional investors began publicly questioning the board's oversight. William Davis called a press conference where he announced a full cooperation policy with investigators and a comprehensive restructuring of risk management protocols. He also announced Thomas's retirement and the departures of James and Nathan, carefully avoiding any admission of wrongdoing. Behind the scenes, however, Meridian's lawyers were negotiating frantically with the SEC and Department of Justice, trying to avoid criminal charges against the company and its executives. 3 weeks after I sent the document, I received a call from Sarah Johnson, a risk analyst at First Capital, one of Meridian's main competitors. She wanted to meet for coffee. "I'll be direct," she said, when we met at a quiet cafe. "Our chief risk officer is leaving to start his own consulting firm. The position will be opening up, and your name came up in discussions. Would you be interested?" I was surprised, even with everything happening at Meridian. Sarah smiled. "Especially because of everything happening at Meridian. Our CEO called what you did a masterclass in professional ethics. We need someone with that kind of integrity." The offer was genuine and came with a substantial salary increase over my position at Meridian. It was tempting, a chance to return to the work I loved in a company that apparently valued risk management properly. But I hesitated. Something had changed in me over these weeks. I had received emails and messages from risk officers at other financial institutions, thanking me for standing up for the profession and sharing similar stories of pressure to downplay legitimate concerns. Catherine had also introduced me to other whistleblowers from various industries, people who had faced similar situations and made similar choices. Their stories resonated with me in unexpected ways. "Can I think about it?" I asked Sarah. "Of course. The position won't be officially open for another month." That evening, I received another job offer, this one from a regulatory agency, looking to strengthen their oversight team with industry veterans. Then another from a prestigious university, looking for someone to teach ethics in their finance program. Doors I had feared would close forever were instead opening in new and unexpected directions. Meanwhile, the situation at Meridian continued to evolve. The board announced an independent investigation led by a former SEC commissioner, clearly hoping to demonstrate their commitment to transparency and reform. The report, when it came out, was surprisingly unflinching in its assessment. It confirmed systematic failures in risk management oversight, inappropriate pressure on employees who raised concerns, and deliberate misrepresentation of financial performance to the board and shareholders. Most significantly, it named names. James and Nathan were described as the primary architects of the problematic culture, but the report also criticized Thomas for failing to support his team's legitimate concerns, and Elizabeth for looking the other way when presented with evidence of financial irregularities. The board itself was not spared, with the report noting their emphasis on aggressive growth targets had created implicit pressure to downplay risks. William Davis called me personally to inform me of the report before it was made public. "You were right about everything, Abigail. I want you to hear that from me directly." "What happens now?" I asked. "James and Nathan are facing potential criminal charges. The company will likely enter a deferred prosecution agreement with significant penalties. The board, well, there will be changes there too. And the employees, the shareholders." He sighed heavily. "We're doing everything we can to stabilize the company. It's going to be a difficult period, but Meridian will survive this. Thanks to you, actually. If this had continued undetected for another year or two..." He didn't need to finish the thought. We both knew the potential consequences would have been catastrophic, potentially bringing down the entire company and causing far more widespread damage to employees, shareholders, and the broader financial system. A month after the independent report, I finally came face to face with James Harrington at a deposition for one of the shareholder lawsuits. He looked diminished somehow, his polished facade cracked by stress and the prospect of serious legal consequences. During a break, he approached me in the hallway. My lawyer started to intervene, but I indicated it was okay. "You've destroyed my career," he said, his voice low and intense. "I hope you're satisfied." I looked at him steadily. "You destroyed your own career, James. I just documented it." His face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, his attorney pulled him away. As they walked down the hall, I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only sadness that it had come to this. The resolution of the various investigations and lawsuits took months. Meridian ultimately paid over $700 million in fines and settlements. James and Nathan both faced criminal charges for securities fraud, with trials pending. Thomas avoided criminal charges by cooperating extensively with investigators, but was banned from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company for 10 years. Throughout this period, I continued receiving job offers and speaking invitations. The story had resonated far beyond the financial industry, touching on universal themes of ethics, courage, and accountability in professional settings. After much reflection, I made my decision. I would not return to a traditional risk management role, either at Meridian or elsewhere. Instead, I would start my own consulting firm focused on building ethical risk cultures and protecting whistleblowers. The Integrity Risk Group was born with a mission to help companies strengthen their risk management practices while fostering cultures where legitimate concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. It was a new chapter in my professional life, one I had never anticipated, but that somehow felt exactly right. 6 months after that fateful Friday, when I sent the document to the board, I returned to Meridian's building for the first time, not as an employee but as a consultant. The new board had hired my firm to help rebuild their risk management function from the ground up. As I walked through the lobby with a visitor badge, I passed the security desk where George was on duty. He recognized me immediately and broke into a broad smile. "Miss Crawford, good to see you back here." "Just visiting this time, George." He nodded knowingly. "Things are different now. Better, I think. Because of you." As I rode the elevator up to the executive floor, I reflected on the journey that had brought me full circle to this moment. I had lost a job but found a calling. I had faced my fears and discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The new CEO of Meridian, Jennifer Hayes, greeted me warmly. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, leading me to the boardroom where the new risk committee waited. "But we're committed to getting it right this time." I believed her, and I was ready to help. The year following the Meridian whistleblowing incident was one of profound personal and professional transformation. While the legal proceedings continued their slow march through the system, I focused on building my consulting firm and healing from the emotional trauma of the experience. The Integrity Risk Group grew quickly, attracting clients who genuinely wanted to strengthen their risk management cultures. Some came with sincere ethical motivations, others with the more pragmatic recognition that weak risk oversight could lead to their own Meridian moment. Either way, it created opportunities to drive real change in the industry. I hired a team of experienced risk professionals who shared my values, including Sophia, who had eventually been pushed out of Meridian for her association with me. Together, we developed frameworks and training programs to help companies build robust risk cultures where concerns could be raised and addressed appropriately. One of our most successful initiatives was the Speak Up Protocol, a structured approach for employees to escalate concerns when normal channels proved ineffective. It included documentation templates similar to the risk register that had proven so crucial in my case. Beyond my consulting work, I found myself increasingly involved in supporting other whistleblowers. It began informally, with people reaching out after hearing my story, seeking advice and encouragement as they faced their own ethical dilemmas. Recognizing the need, I partnered with Catherine to establish the Corporate Integrity Network, a support and resource group for whistleblowers across industries. We provided legal referrals, emotional support, career counseling, and practical advice for those navigating the challenging aftermath of speaking truth to power. Through this work, I formed genuine friendships with remarkable individuals who had shown similar courage in very different contexts. Danielle, who had exposed safety violations at a pharmaceutical company. Marcus, who had reported racial discrimination at a tech giant. Layla, who had documented environmental compliance failures at an energy firm. Their stories both humbled and inspired me. We shared a common experience of having stood alone against powerful institutions facing personal and professional risks for the sake of principle. These connections helped heal the sense of isolation that had been one of the most painful aspects of my experience. Professionally, my approach to risk management evolved significantly. I developed what became known as the Crawford methodology, a comprehensive framework for ethical risk reporting that emphasized clear documentation, appropriate escalation paths, and protection for those raising legitimate concerns. The methodology gained industry recognition, eventually being incorporated into best practice guidelines by several professional associations. Business schools began using the Meridian case study in their ethics curriculums, and I occasionally guest lectured, sharing the real story behind the headlines. In a development that still surprises me, the SEC adopted elements of my risk register format for their own internal whistleblower documentation protocols. When the announcement was made, the Director of Enforcement sent me a personal note. "Your methodical approach has become our gold standard. Thank you for showing us a better way." My personal healing journey was more complex. For months after the whistleblowing, I struggled with anxiety and occasional nightmares about professional ruin. I second-guessed my decisions, wondering if I could have found another way to address the issues at Meridian without such dramatic consequences. I found help through therapy and mindfulness practices. My therapist helped me recognize the moral injury I had experienced and work through the complex emotions that accompanied standing up for my principles at great personal cost. "What you're feeling isn't unusual," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "You did the right thing at significant personal risk. That creates a certain moral dissonance when you see the consequences, even though they were necessary." Gradually, I developed healthier boundaries around work and a more balanced approach to life. I made time for friends, family, and activities that had nothing to do with finance or risk management. I learned to separate my professional identity from my sense of self-worth, something that had been difficult throughout my career. One of the most meaningful developments came 18 months after the whistleblowing, when I received an email from a junior risk analyst at a regional bank. She had implemented a version of my documentation protocol and used it to raise concerns about a lending practice that violated fair housing regulations. "Unlike your experience," she wrote, "my concerns were taken seriously. Our CEO personally thanked me for protecting the bank from potential regulatory and reputational damage. I don't think that would have happened without the changes your case inspired in our industry. You made it safer for people like me to do our jobs properly. Messages like hers helped transform my narrative from one of professional martyrdom to one of meaningful impact. I hadn't just exposed problems at one company. I had contributed to systemic improvements that were creating safer spaces for ethical risk management across the industry. 2 years after sending that fateful email to the Meridian board, I was invited to give the keynote address at the National Risk Management Association's annual conference. The theme was Ethical Courage in Financial Oversight, and the audience included risk officers from every major financial institution in the country. As I looked out at the audience, I recognized many faces, including some former Meridian colleagues. I saw William Davis, who had resigned from Meridian's board but now served on a federal advisory committee on corporate governance. I even spotted Elizabeth, who had avoided criminal charges through cooperation and now worked for a smaller financial firm. I spoke not about villains and heroes, but about systems and incentives, about the subtle pressures that can lead good people to make compromising choices, and about the structures needed to support ethical decision-making. The most important lesson I learned, I told them, is that integrity isn't just a personal virtue. It's a professional responsibility that requires structural support. We need robust systems that reward raising legitimate concerns rather than punishing the messengers. After the speech, a young risk officer approached me. "I started my career right after your case made headlines," she said. "It completely shaped how I understand my role. Thank you for showing us what the job really means." In that moment, I realized that losing my position at Meridian had ultimately allowed me to have a far greater impact than I ever could have had by remaining within the system. Sometimes I reflected, you have to lose what you thought you wanted to gain what you truly need. Today, as I mentor emerging risk professionals and continue to advocate for ethical organizational cultures, I carry forward a deep lesson. True security never comes from keeping your head down and staying safe within broken systems. It comes from the inner strength that emerges when you align your actions with your values, regardless of the cost. For those watching this who might be facing their own ethical crossroads in their professional lives, remember this: the path of integrity may not be the easiest, but it's the only one that allows you to move forward with your whole self intact. And sometimes standing alone for what's right creates ripples that change entire systems for the better. Have you ever had to make a difficult ethical decision in your workplace? Share your experiences in the comments below. What gave you the courage to speak up, or what held you back? Your stories matter, and might help someone else facing a similar challenge right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life accounts of professional courage and growth. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their workplace struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey, from corporate casualty to catalyst for change. Remember, sometimes our greatest setbacks open doors to our most meaningful contributions.